Thank you for joining me this morning. My name's Kevin Fitzgerald, and today we are going to talk about power and leadership for project managers. And somebody pointed out to me that what we're really teaching here, what we're talking about, is how to be a leader when you're not the boss. And that applies to project managers, certainly, but to consultants and to lots of people in their everyday walks of life in their work. At some point, we're all called upon to be leaders, and quite frequently, we're not the boss. So today we're going to talk about first, we're going to talk about power. And we're going to talk about the traditional forms of power and how they've been used in the past. But then we're going to talk about more modern forms of power and how they are much more effective, especially for people who are leaders but not the boss, project managers, consultants. Then we're going to switch over to leadership and go through a very similar flow. We're going to talk about traditional leadership, how it's been typically viewed and used. And then we're going to talk about modern leadership styles and how specifically the transformational leadership style is very effective for project managers and projects. So let's jump right in. Oh, wait, before I do, if when I give these seminars, quite often I do this at conferences where I'm in a room full of people and I can see all of your faces. And if one of you were to lean over to one side or to maybe raise your hand, I would notice you, call on you, and we would have a conversation. You could make comments or ask questions. But I can't see you in this venue. In fact, I'm kind of looking at a camera and I've got screens and lights and things like that. And so I want everybody to feel very comfortable unmuting your mic and interrupting me and asking a question. And if somebody feels more comfortable putting a question in the chat and I don't notice it, then I would invite everybody to help me facilitate and call out that I've got an open question in the chat. All right, first we're going to talk about the traditional forms of power. And the first one right off the bat is legitimate power. This comes from having a rank or a role. This is called titular power sometimes because it's all about having a title. And this has got nothing to do with how smart or effective you are. This is about a hierarchy in an org chart. It's whoever's boss, whoever's in charge of whoever's your manager. And and there's also some forms of legitimate power that you can get through credentials. So, for instance, an Oracle certified DBA automatically comes with a little bit more legitimate power than somebody who's not certified. And those certifications grant you some legitimate power. Now, if we were doing a workshop, say that we were going to do this for 2 hours, we'd stop and have a conversation right now about how many of you probably have people in your life, in your jobs, in your roles that have some form of legitimate power. But for just right now, I want you to think about those people around you that tend to just use legitimate power to get things done because it's really not effective in the long run. In fact, it's very limited. What typically happens is you get a new boss in and they say, this is the new boss. And they've got this degree or this certification. And everybody goes, well, okay, I should follow them. I should do what they say. But within a very few months, you get to know the person. You get to know how smart they really are, how much expert power they have, what they really know, how much informational power they have. And after a while, that legitimate power is just a tiny portion of their ability to influence you. In fact, if you find yourself saying, hey, do this because I'm the boss, or I'm right because I'm the one that's got the degree or certification, the people you're trying to lead and influence, they're going to get turned off very quickly and they're not going to be very responsive. So relying on legitimate power isn't that a good of a move. And in fact, legitimate power for project managers is very limited. I mean, you might get some legitimate power from having a project management certification like the CAPM, Certified Scrum Master, or the PMP. You may have some legitimate power granted by your position. I used to be a project manager, and while I was just another project manager, my boss was a very high level boss. And she would tell people, when you work on projects, Kevin's in charge. And that gave me some legitimate power. But what I even quickly learned is that that didn't get me very far. And so you really have to find other ways of using power to influence people when you're not the boss, when you're just the project manager or just the consultant. There's a couple types of power that tend to be linked to legitimate power. And this is coercive and reward power. And this is basically the idea that you can punish or reward people. Get this done and I'll reward you. Or if you fail to get this done, I'll fire you. Uh, and but again, this isn't necessarily power that project managers can or should use. And again, this is one of those times where I want you to stop and think, do you have people around you in positions of power that tend to do everything by either threatening to punish or reward people? And how well does that work? Does it still work with you? Coercive power actually works in the short term. If you threaten somebody, do this or I'll fire you, then they're going to do it. But I want you to really understand that that's not the first thing that they think of. When you threaten somebody, the very first thing they think of is, how can I get away from this person? They want to end the relationship. Your threats and punishments to these people is only going to go so far, and it's going to create resentment, and it's going to really depreciate your power as a leader. And I really want to say to you that coercive power, specifically in project management, do not mix. You should never use coercive power as a project manager. You shouldn't even have an opinion of why somebody on your team can't get their tasks done. And here's what I mean. You may have a team member who isn't getting things done, everything's done late, or it's not done correctly. And you may know why this person isn't getting their stuff done. But I'm here to tell you, don't utilize that information. As a project manager, you need to go back to this person's boss and explain this resource is unable to complete their tasks on time or effectively. And we need to either get some different resources, or we need to add some resources, or we need to do something about this resource. You need to treat this as just another risk. We have a risk on our project that things won't get done on time, and you, the project manager, need to mitigate that risk by escalating it. And your first stop is typically that person's actual boss, but you may also want to put this kind of a risk in your risk log and define it as something that has to be addressed, and take this to your steering committee. So in my particular practices, I don't tell somebody's boss they can't get this job done because of whatever it is. I just say they can't get it done and I need to do something about it. And while I would tell most folks, hey, coercive power doesn't work, and really reward power only works in the short run, because that really is true. But reward power and project management very can mix. See, coercive power and reward power are extrinsic influences, and they only work in the short term. They don't really motivate people at a deep level to climb mountains. If you just constantly threaten people or constantly reward them, pretty soon that becomes the norm, and it doesn't have any influence over the person. But reward power can work for project managers because projects are temporary natures, especially in a matrixed organization like OU. Matrixed organizations are places where you've got a very small number of people whose job it really is to do projects. Typically, the project management office, maybe you've got some engineers that design things. But most of the rest of the people that I end up with on my projects are people who have day jobs. This is a temporary thing for them. They're on this project because they've either got to test the system we're implementing, or they've got to provide requirements or business analysis for whatever process it is that we're trying to improve. And temporary rewards for temporary efforts does work. And it's easy to do. Using reward power need not be expensive. But first, I want to tell you, people tend to fall into two personality types. They love rewards or they love praise. And quite frequently, they like one and not the other. So, as I mentioned, gifts, a reward doesn't have to be expensive. I have had projects where every week we had candy bar awards that we gave to people. Somebody would get nominated for great teamwork and we'd give them a Three Musketeers bar. Or somebody would get nominated for an award because they came up with this great idea that was going to save the university a bunch of money. And we gave them a $100,000 bar. Alternately, praise is free. Putting somebody's name on an agenda and calling out that they did a great job, for some people, that is such a charge. It's so rewarding. They're so excited by being recognized for their great work. And if you can combine these two forms, these praise and gifts, you can get a lot of positive effects on people to influence them to really want to come back and do a great job. But be aware but some people react very negatively to praise. Introverts can just be embarrassed by you calling out their name in a meeting and having them stand up. And more importantly, there's some avenues you can go down that won't work. These are dead ends. And this is where you give somebody a gift in private because you don't want everybody else to know. That really affects some people negatively. They don't like the fact that we're not supposed to tell anybody. So be very aware of people who might react negatively to gifts or praise being done overly publicly or overly privately. So I mentioned some traditional forms of power: legitimate, coercive, reward. And these are the kind of things that pop into your mind, especially when you think about legitimate leaders, bosses. But those don't work. In fact, most people, according to this survey, don't want to do that. We asked almost, I say we, it was Forbes, asked almost 6,000 leaders, are you more motivated by power or achievement? And almost 60% of them said, I am much more motivated by achievement and than power. So I think that this is a very good angle to take with people, that we want to be sure that we are expressing to the people that we lead, I want to achieve things, not have power over you. So if I'm up here telling you that a project manager really shouldn't be using these forms of power, except that reward power intermittently, how do we use power to influence people to achieve success? And that's by looking at more modern and effective forms of power. So the first one on our list, information power. And this comes from just knowing things that other people don't. People with information power are the ones that are keeping up with what's going on in the industry by reading Harvard Business Review or by paying attention to Gartner articles. This is information power. When we have some question about how we're going to react to some legislation, we go and get lawyers because they have good information power about how these kinds of things work. But information power is temporary. In fact, I'm here to tell you that I don't like the idea that anybody would ever try to hold on to information power by holding on to information. So, do you have people in your organization that seem to want to hold on to information power by gatekeeping information? That's not a good way to do it, especially for project managers. You see, information power is really important for project managers. And this is about how you communicate the status of your projects to your team members, to your steering committee, your stakeholders, your executive sponsors. This is about making sure that all of your status reports are current. If you have portfolios, dashboards, any of that, that information is current and available to people, and that you are seen as a resource that pushes this information to people. What I'm here to tell you is that I think as a project manager, it's very important that you have and use information power and then give it away as quickly as you possibly can by making sure that people know what's up to date on your projects. And for me, one of the most important things is what's wrong. If you were to tell me about 10 projects going on and 7 of them were fine, but 3 of them had problems, the next day, I'm all about those 3 projects. I know what's wrong with them, and I've learned things about them since then. I probably can't remember the 7 that you told me that were okay because I focus on risks, I focus on the exceptions and resolving problems. Another form of modern power for project managers is expert power. And this isn't that you know something, it's that you can do something. This is where you have a particular area of expertise. These are your CPAs, your business analysts, the folks that know how things work. And information power and expert power are 2 of the most accessible forms of power there are. Nobody can stop you from obtaining them. In fact, one of the most interesting things I read when studying this topic is that Silicon Valley is an example where individuals with a lot of expert power and information power and very little capital were able to create giant companies that were worth lots and lots of money using just information and expert power. So, who around you are the experts? Who are the people in your organization that you realize know things at a deep level? One of my favorite ones is a person in IT who understands the security requirements around doing projects that have classified or controlled information in them. And I won't name names, but I have come to rely on this person as somebody with high levels of expert power that can tell me exactly what we should do when it comes to running projects with very sensitive data. Expert power is very important for project managers. And to me, it's your knowledge, your ability to identify risks, escalate issues, get a group of people to make a data-driven decision that doesn't have any emotion in it, and how to communicate with people. It's about your ability to manage risk, to identify risks that are on the critical path of your project and do something about it. It's about governance and escalation, that you know when things go wrong, exactly what to do next. People frequently will call me and say, hey, this has gone wrong. What do we do? And I say, let's look at your project plan. It literally says we're going to escalate problems like this to the steering committee, and we've defined your steering committee. So go schedule a steering committee. I'll go with you, and we'll talk to those folks about what it takes to get the problem solved. Communication plans, change management, great big items that make project managers into experts. Okay, I want to stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments they want to make? My last form of power that I want to talk about for project managers is the most important, and it's called referent power. And this is about becoming a role model. Having high levels of referent power means people like you. They think you're so effective that they want to be around you and be like you. They identify you as a person who gets things done. And it's not just about effectiveness. It's also about charisma. It's about, unfortunately, being charming. And while you can be transformational without being charismatic, I'm here to tell you that it really, really helps. And then, in fact, there are things you can learn about charisma. I'm going to take a moment here and look at my chat. Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Lisa. Okay. Referent power also occurs in groups. In fact, it's a multiplying effect. If you have high referent power, you're kind of smart, you're effective, you're kind to people, you communicate well, people start looking up to you. But if you're part of a group of people and you all have those same traits, your power is absolutely multiplied. I mean, you could be Batman, and you can be Batman. He doesn't have any superpowers, he's just got money. But it's one thing to be Batman, and it's another thing to be Batman in the Justice League, hanging out with Superman, Wonder Woman, and Jason Momoa. That being in a part of that group just multiplies that power. And there are negative referent power groups. I'm going to probably date myself here because it's such an old reference. But when I was in high school, there was a group of kids that tended to hang out behind the gymnasium smoking cigarettes and talking trash. That's the example of a negative power group. You do not want to be like the negative power group. And I want to make sure that you understand something very important. Referent power, so valuable to a project manager, and coercive force is literally the opposite. Using coercive power lowers referent power, sometimes permanently. So think about people in your particular part of the organization that you look up to, not because they're the boss, but because they're effective, they're kind, and they communicate well with people. Referent power, as I've mentioned, I think is the most important thing for project managers. You can start achieving referent power by being present, showing up in the meetings, being seen, by being likable, kind of hard to define, by being supportive, offering to help people, communicating effectively. One of my most favorite things about this, the grace and composure with which you handle conflict and confrontation. When things go wrong, do you remain positive, kind, and graceful in dealing with those negative things? And then one of the most important aspects for project managers in achieving referent power is being prepared like a scout. So here's some hands-on ways that you can make yourself show up in meetings ready and prepared. First of all, you've got regular meetings every week. Set some recurring time to prepare for those meetings, to determine I've got a status meeting with my team in 2 days. So 2 days before that, ask yourself, what's next? Okay, do we need to update the project schedule? Have things changed about the schedule? What risks are on the critical path that I need to get in front of the team? Are we ready for the next milestone? Are there any blockers or miscommunications I've noticed that I could remove so that people can be more effective in working with each other? Have I left somebody out? Was there somebody mentioned in the last meeting that I need to add to this meeting? And after you've kind of asked yourself these questions, what I teach my project managers is draft the next agenda/status report, kind of depends on how you do your projects, for that next status meeting. And 2 days or at least 24 hours before the meeting, send it to everybody that's going to be in the meeting and call out, these are the things that you said you were going to do in the last meeting, and that you said you were going to have 2 days from now. And that's going to hustle them. That's going to remind them what they were going to do. Another thing I do a lot is that I will be monitoring my email communications, Slack, whatever it is, text messaging during the week between the last status meeting and the next status meeting. And when I see somebody that replies with an email, oh, I got ABC done, then when I'm drafting that next status report agenda for that next meeting, I automatically move that planned task to the accomplished section so that when we get there, we've already noted that that's done. So this is a lot about being prepared. Being prepared is one of the most important things for a project manager, period. And it's one of the best ways for you to achieve referent power, the most effective power you can have as a project manager. Some other things that I would advertise, and this is, many of these things that I'm showing you, in fact, most everything I'm showing you is based on social research and well-established. But occasionally, slides like this, well, this is what Kevin thinks about it. I tell all of my project managers, do not let your compliance requirements become overdue. We are not late. We do not need people chasing us down, telling us you didn't do fire safety training. And it's not just that we need to establish that we are always on time, we are always sticking to deadlines approach. Honestly, if you're the kind of person who they always have to remind to do the training, then I'm telling you, those administrators behind your back are actually talking about, gee, I can't believe we got to remind them again. It lowers your referent power to have to, especially as a project manager, to have to be reminded to get things done. Another thing is being seen. We're all, or I don't know all, but quite a few of us have been doing a lot of remote work. And some of us are still doing remote work from time to time. And I'm still startled at the people who's have terrible lighting, who the camera's aimed at the top of their head, or the shot is just so horrible. So if you're going to be in Zoom meetings where you're trying to influence people, you've got to turn your camera on. In fact, I very much espouse that if you go to meetings and your camera's not on, that's like going to a real meeting room, but sitting in the corner. And if you were leading that meeting, if you're the project manager, would you just go sit in the corner and do it? And while it's a tactic that's kind of hard to learn, and I started out my career in radio, television, and film, so I had a few bonus skills when I came to this. Whenever you're doing Zoom meetings and you need to make a point, then stare straight into the camera while you're doing it. Because it's the same thing as looking into somebody's eyes while making a point. And you can be much more effective in getting important messages across if you will take into account how you appear when you are making those communications. And last, your appearance really does matter. I'm sorry, dressing up a little bit, dressing up just a little bit better than everybody else. I'm going to take 30 seconds and tell you a quick story. I was a subcontractor on a giant project. And the main contractor said, we're all going to meet with the customer. I didn't know any better, so I showed up in a suit and tie. And all the prime contractors were all wearing polos. The customer came in and would only talk to me. They would ask me questions, and I would go, well, your prime contractor will address that. And they would look at the prime contractor and they ask a question, and then they turn right back to me. Dressing up just a little better than everybody else is a psychological manipulation that encourages people, that tells people that you have taken yourself seriously and you know what's going on. So we're going to finish up our summary of the power section with a few of these takeaways. Start becoming self-aware of how you use power and try to think about how other people are doing it. The next time you find yourself following a crowd or a leader, the next time you're enamored with somebody, ask yourself, what kind of forms of power are in use? That's going to tell you a lot about how you evaluate people, how you evaluate crowds, how you value yourself. And when you find yourself in a leadership position, I just said this, practice self-awareness. Understand what your power and influence comes from. Several decades ago, I had somebody point out that my employees laughed at my jokes, not so much because they were funny, but because I was the boss. And that really bothered me. I didn't want to have that kind of relationship with those people. So I tried to find better jokes. Okay, I'm just kidding. But these kind of things happen. And if you find yourself trying to hold on to information because it gives you power, recognize that this is not the way to do it. That's a fragile base. Information power is fleeting. And as I've said, I think project managers should try and give it away. Remember that legitimate power comes and goes with positions. It only works early in relationships. Coercive power is not sustainable. It just burns bridges. And instead, we need to look at ways of building our expertise, developing charisma and grace, and increasing our awareness of ourselves and others. Okay, before we get into the leadership section, questions, comments? Okay, well, feel free to interrupt me if you have anything. We're going to now talk about leadership styles, and we're going to follow a similar flow. I'm going to talk about transactional leadership, which is the old school traditional way of doing it. But then we're going to talk briefly about three styles of leadership: authentic, empowering, and servant. We're going to discuss those briefly. And then we're going to take a deep dive into transformational leadership, which is the most effective form of leadership for project managers. First, what's traditional leadership look like? The transactional boss. And you've seen this diagram a lot of times. I had great fun redrawing it in PowerPoint. Transactional bosses, what do you know? They use the transactional process of rewards and punishment. Do this and I'll reward you. Don't do this and I'll punish you. This is not any kind of a way to develop people to creatively solve problems. My leadership training is all very focused around leading people who use technology to solve problems. And I'll bet that description is 90% of you. And transactional leadership doesn't get that done. Briefly, transactional leadership has three forms. Contingent reward, which is the one I've been discussing all along. Do this and we'll reward you. Don't do this and we'll punish you. But there's two subforms. Active management by exception. And this is where you do nothing to help or develop the person. You just stop them before they make a mistake. And this may seem terrible, but it's actually an effective way to lead up or sideways. You probably aren't putting a whole lot of effort into figuring out how to develop your boss, but I'll bet you, if you have a good relationship with them, you would try to stop them before they made a mistake. Or maybe a peer, you might treat them that way. So active management by exception has its purpose. Passive management by exception is you don't do anything to help or develop the person, you just punish them after they make a mistake. This has one purpose: running someone off. Don't use this, and I hope you don't have to run people off, but that's about all it's good for. Let's talk about modern leadership. And here, I've got the new version of that diagram. I love how this looks. Leading is not pushing from behind. There's a fellow named Antonio Grasso. And Antonio Grasso is not a researcher, but he's a big leadership guru, and he writes a lot of articles. And I really like his lists, where every item on the left corresponds to an item on the right. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but think about the people around you that tend to do and say the things on the left, and the people around you that tend to do and say the things on the right, the leaders, and how you feel about those people. I've been around both of them. Leaders inspire me. I've had people 30 years younger than I am, four ranks below me, that acted like the person on the right. And I wanted to go along with whatever it is they had to say. And I've had people in various methods and relationships act on like the person on the left. And I do whatever it is to get them out of my office. We're going to dive into those three styles of leadership briefly, and then we're going to start talking about transformational leadership. Researchers have determined that there's lots of different styles that leaders take. If any of you are into the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia has literally been researched by doing peer-reviewed article research and identified as one of the most effective leaders of all time because he uses every style. It depends on he's a very situational leader, or he was. But authentic leadership is the first one we want to talk about. And this is a style of leadership that's especially effective for outward facing executive leaders. And this is about being self aware. So authentic leaders know when their followers are kind of overly ingratiating, when they're just kind of sucking up to them. They use balanced processing. That is, they get information from various sources, and they use reasoning and evidence to make decisions, not emotions. It means they display relational transparency. They are honest and open in close relationships. And last, they have an internalized moral perspective. And what I mean by that is they make morality-based decisions regardless of the circumstances. So they tend to make decisions the same way regardless of circumstances, because their internal moral compass is so strong. This is the kind of leadership we need from our president of the university and our president of anything, these outward facing leaders. Now, think about somebody 2 or 3 levels up from you. Are they displaying these traits? I hope so. Let's talk about empowering leadership. Empowering leadership is a style of leadership that's extremely effective for volunteer organizations. And these leaders realize that they have got to get people going and going on their own. So the first thing they do is they convey confidence. They tell their followers, you can do this. They emphasize significance. Not only can you do this, you're uniquely important in helping us get this done. In fact, they share decision making. You get to help make decisions, and they encourage their followers to remove obstacles themselves. Go out, figure it out what the most important thing you can do is, and then do whatever it takes to get it done. Volunteer organizations respond well to empowering leadership. Then there's servant leadership. Anybody out there that I'll bet a lot of you have heard of this. It became popularized in the 90s by an author, researcher named Greenleaf, and has been reinforced multiple times. Servant leadership is an exceptionally effective form of leadership for religious organizations. And leaders who use servant leadership develop people by being truthful and open. They are authentic. I've been in church management before, and I heard a deacon say something, well, I don't believe that fellow's authentic. And what I realized was that was church speak for he's a liar. They display authenticity. They share leadership, similar to the empowering or volunteer organization. You, follower, get to help lead. Here's another one like empowering leadership. You get to help pick the goals. People are the most important aspect of servant leadership. Servant leaders value people's outcomes more than the organization's outcome. And last, they build community. The servant leader is really about organizing a group of people to become cohesive and a team, and then figure out the most effective things they can do based on what is needed and what they can do, and then get it done. So for those of you that are parts of religious organizations, no matter what kind it is, think about your leaders. Are they good? If they are, do they do these things? I think you'll find that strong leaders in religious organizations tend to display servant leadership. The last form of leadership that I'll hit, and then the next section we go into it in more depth, is transformational leadership. This is the change leader. Typically, what I like to say is, project managers, people who lead change. Not that there's a bunch of you out there leading change, and we don't call you project managers, but you're kind of that way. And what change leaders do is they influence their followers to rise above self-interest. This whole thing we're doing, it's bigger than you or your team or your department. It's about the whole organization. So we're going to put aside our petty interests and we're going to do something that benefits the whole thing. They are encouraged to lead themselves. You, follower, are the best person to determine the most important thing you can get done, to be accountable for their actions. Go out there and do something and then come back and own it. You're responsible. Alter the goals they have set and seek new goals. One of the aspects of followers of transformational leaders is that when they are done with something, they are not so prone to go, what do you want me to do next? They're more prone to go, I think this should be done next. And they may check with you, I think this should be done next. That's the kind of thing you're looking in a follower for a transformational leadership. And they gain rewards via self-enforcement. The self-satisfaction of a job well done is enough for this person. And I also want to point out that all of these characteristics are very strong in what I call the children of farmers. That is, people who live in an area where the agricultural economy is still happening or it went away only a few generations ago. When you go to parts of the country where there has not been any agricultural economy for generations and generations, they don't have as many of these traits, but us Okies do. And I'm sorry, if you're from Oklahoma, have lived in Oklahoma, or if you've just been here for 10 minutes, I'm including you in here as an Okie. But we are children of farmers and we are good at being transformational. We know what needs to get done and we're taking it and we're going to go do it. Quick comment before we hit the next section. Servant leadership and transformational leadership are astonishingly similar. They really are. They're not the same thing. A lot of researchers have asked this question. When I was in school, I actually wrote papers on, oh my gosh, these two things look so similar. But one of the things I've really learned about this, they're very, very similar, except that a servant leader cares slightly more about the outcomes for people and the community than they do the organization. And transformational leaders care slightly more about the outcomes for the organization than they do the people. But they know you can't transform the organization without transforming the people. It's not enough to put in a new fancy system that does something. You've also got to transform the people so that they are ready to use the new system. Transformational leadership is a holistic thing and it's about change. All right, quick leadership summary. First of all, leadership is contingent. There's no best way. It depends on the situation, the goal, the leader, the followers. And I tried to describe different ways, different situations where you might use different types of leadership. Transactional leadership can be used for the type of people you don't see or hear. That contingent reward, do this and I'll pay you. If you're working with offshore resources that you never see, then that may be the only way you're ever going to be able to influence them is transactionally, and that's okay. Active management by exception can be used for leading up or sometimes sideways. Never use passive management by exception, like I said, unless you're just trying to run somebody off. Servant leadership for those around you in non-project situations. I love to talk to my project managers and say, you're a transformational leadership until we're just hanging out with each other. Then we're servant leaders. Authentic leadership when you have legitimate power, and empowering leadership for volunteer organizations, but use transformational leadership for projects. Before we get into this last section, any other questions, comments? I see the chat. Boy, okay, Katie, you've got a really good question. I got a group of people. They're all motivated, but somehow I've got a Debbie Downer in there that keeps bringing everybody down. And I don't have a great answer for you other than to say, I would call that person out uniquely. Help us understand why you are so negative about this. Then treat their responses to you as risks. Okay, you've identified that this thing might go wrong or that this thing may not go as the way we planned. What can we do to prevent that? And you may never be able to get them to quit being negative, but I'm hoping that you can get your group of people to see two things. This person may actually have something valuable to offer in the form of identifying risks or problems, and you're not going to let it bring you down, that you're going to address those and go on.
So how do you handle somebody who's combative? somebody who just doesn't ever want to see you as a leader or in a leadership role.
When you say combative, you mean they refuse to engage in conversation about how to solve the problem?
Correct.
Passive management by exception. I know what you're talking about. I've got people I can name that I feel like that once things aren't going exactly the way they want, they become combative and very uncooperative. And I have a very short tolerance for that. I I'm sorry, I really have to say, I would work with them for a while to try and figure out why they act this way. If they were passed over for a promotion, or if we're just not communicating with them effectively. But at the end of the day, there are some people who do not belong on the bus.
Don't you feel like sometimes, though, you have to find out what they would like the outcome to be to see if you can even come to an agreement?
Yeah, absolutely. I have, I feel like I've had people who kept telling me they couldn't get it done because they were busy. They couldn't get it done when they were busy. And I didn't believe them. And then when I dug into it, I found out that they had all of this extra work that had been piled on them. And I had to go to their boss and go, well, of course they're in a bad mood. They're overloaded. But at the same time, so I want to know what it is. And I want to go back to that previous comment. They are negative for one of two reasons. They genuinely see a problem and feel like nobody believes them, or they're just obstinate and don't want to cooperate. And so I dig, I want to find out what it is. How can I help you? What is it that we can do to make you more comfortable with this situation? But again, at the end of the day, I mean, you can't fix everybody. Transformational leadership, the attributes of, there are four basic attributes of a transformational leader. They use idealized influence, inspirational motivation, individualized consideration, and intellectual stimulation. And here's what that looks like. Idealized influence means you have referent power. It means that you are able to communicate well. You have some level of charisma, and I don't mean movie star charisma. I'm talking about that real authentic, I'm really in the room with you and I want to hear you and I want to communicate with you. You have idealized influence by living the values of the organization or group. That is, that you are walking the talk. In fact, if we have chance, we're going to get, oh, it is on this slide. You are purpose driven to get followers to commit to the vision. This is where you are able to show people, I am after the same thing you are, this great thing that's going to improve the organization. And when you are able to achieve these things, when you're able to kind of get to this, follow me because I'm trustworthy and I know where we're going, then what you'll see is people will begin to respect and want to emulate that leader and identify with their ideals. Quick side note, there are some people who in our history have been incredibly transformational leaders who had zero charisma. Two of them mentioned in some of the literature are Gandhi and Mother Teresa. These people didn't, do you remember video of Mother Teresa making speeches? She didn't do that. She didn't try to lead anybody. She, for the most part, walked the talk so seriously that she approached this level of self-actualization where her mission was more important than her own life. And that kind of commitment will transform things without any charisma. So that's an important aspect of it. I don't want to drag us off of, you don't need charisma. I just want to point out how important walking the talk is. Second is inspirational motivation. And this is one we hear a lot about. If you can create a compelling vision of what we are trying to do, why it's good, how it benefits the organization, the team, and the person. When I do work, I had a sister-in-law who died of cancer. And when I do work for the Stevenson Cancer Center, I am in on it because I want to cure cancer. I am so in on that goal that it kind of supersedes why I'm there for getting paid or having a role or any of those other things. So the ability to create a compelling vision and articulate that to followers helps them understand why we're doing this, identify with that goal, and get on board. We are going to climb that hill and we are going to win. I identify strongly with this one. Another one is individualized consideration. This one is not so obvious. I had to learn this one the hard way. This is about understanding your individual team members' little quirks. This is when I was mentioning trying to understand if they really appreciate praise or if they appreciate gifts. This is about understanding the follower's individual instincts, supporting and encouraging them and mentoring them, considering their individual needs. So you got to keep lines of communication open. You've got to be able to present this image that you can talk to me no matter who you are. I found myself in meeting rooms where the loudest voices dominated the conversation. And after a while, you realize all these loud voices are the extroverts. Extroverts don't make better decisions than introverts. They just make them faster. And fast decisions can have value on the battlefield, some other circumstances, but for the most part, no. So what you will find yourself doing is recognizing the introvert has something to say, but they can't get a word in edgewise. I used to go out of my way to call on them. Hey, what do you think about this? Then I had to figure out that some of those introverts were waiting to be called on, then they would talk. Some of those introverts don't want to talk in that meeting at all. They want to tell me after the meeting. So individualized consideration is figuring out quirks is a bad way to put it, but the individual quirks of your followers and how to communicate with them, how to reward them or how to make them feel valued, and dealing with each of those people uniquely. I put on there, this follower, they're an XYZ person and they need ABC form of challenge or support. The blanket treatment of everybody the same way is not an effective means for the transformational leader. And last is intellectual stimulation. This is about challenging people to take a risk to solve big problems, to swing for the fences. I know you probably have some great idea about how to fix this, and maybe you've brought it up several times and nobody will listen. Or maybe you're just, for whatever reason, but I want to challenge all of my followers to say, if you have an idea about how to make something better, bring that to us. Mention that in the meeting. Let's see if we can make that as a goal. Because at the end of the day, I want my team to know we're not going to be doing things the same way. I'm not going to automate a process and have it work just like the manual process worked before. We're going to automate a process and make it more efficient, take out steps, get higher throughput. That's the kind of thing we're trying to communicate to them. So those are the 4 things that transformational leaders tend to do when they're leading followers. Here are some traits of those people. They're authentic. I've mentioned self-aware, humble, collaborative. I'm not going to read all of these words to you. That's terrible. Active listening skills, making sure, even if it takes the idea of talking to somebody, asking, and they ask you a question, and you wait a second before you answer so that you're communicating to them, I'm really listening to you and I'm going to think about this answer. Active listening skills are super important. But one of the ones I want to point out is this thing I keep mentioning, charisma. Charisma is such an important aspect of this that when researchers first discovered referent power, they called it charismatic power. Then they discovered that while that's an important aspect of it, it didn't define it. The same thing happened with transformational leadership. When researchers first discovered people leading in this way, they kept thinking it was all about personality and they called it charismatic leadership. But it isn't. It's transformational. And as I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to have charisma, but it sure helps. Can we learn it? Actually, here's some things that you can do. Charismatic people are positive. They're optimistic. They make time for things they enjoy. They don't compare themselves to others. That's how they stay positive. They are present. I mentioned being present as an aspect of what project managers need to do. So you're not paying attention to your phone. You're not having to, you don't look like you're so uncomfortable in the room that you can't wait to leave. You talk to everybody. A real important one is you won't trash talk. You refuse to stereotype or denigrate people. Refusing to trash talk, I know It's practically an entertainment for us, but it's not a trait of a person who is charismatic or has referent power. You've got the kind of verbal communication where you ask open-ended questions. You rephrase things back to people to make sure that you understood what they said and that you communicate to them that you understood what they said. You are listening more than you are responding. I mentioned waiting before responding. And then there's the nonverbal communication. And this is all just about making people feel comfortable with talking to you. That's eye contact, leaning into conversations. You've probably been on the Zoom meetings where you notice people who do physical, they nod a lot. That's a really good response from people to make a leader or a speaker more comfortable. Here are 7 scientifically proven ways to develop charisma. Having a cause. Steve Jobs was interviewing the CIO of Pepsi Cola, and he wanted to hire him to come lead Apple. And the CEO said, I had no intention of taking that job until Steve Jobs said, well, do you want to spend the rest of your life making sugar water, or do you want to change the world? And after that, he found it impossible to say no. If you exude confidence about the mission, when you communicate to people, we are going to succeed, that influence has more power over them than past performance. You may have failed frequently in the past, but being positive about this is still how you need to be about it. Attentiveness. The previous slide talked about eye contact, listening and focus. Being warm, kind, graceful, conveying passion. Believing in yourself, which is a lot about having confidence, but I also want to make sure that you understand imposter syndrome is a real thing. I am sure every one of us at some point have been in a situation where we thought, I am not supposed to be here. I am going to be a failure. I can't believe I'm here. That's imposter syndrome. And when you let that get you, it tends to kill charisma. And encouraging self-disclosure. If you ask people to tell them about themselves, then they're going to find you to be a very charismatic person. I'm getting a little bit behind on time, so unfortunately, I'm going to speed up just a little bit. Professional charisma includes being ready for the meeting or the situation. Are you dressed? Do you have your game face on? Are you ready to communicate strategically in this next meeting? One thing, think about what you're going to say before you say it. Keeping it real always is short-term gain for long-term loss. Keeping it real always goes wrong. Reducing the impact of crisis. When things go wrong, if you're the person who doesn't panic, people will look up to you. My joke on here is, what's it say on the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on the cover? It says, don't panic. Walk the talk, be trustworthy and keep secrets, be consistent, go out of your way to develop people, and be kind. Anger and insults aren't charismatic. The effects of transformational leadership are stronger organizational leadership. When you have strong transformational leadership, the followers then start doing the same kinds of things to transform other followers. They achieve extraordinary results. And the things that they do tend to be more aligned with the goals of the organization. Employees who are led by transformational leaders tend to have better well-being. In fact, if you control for how hard somebody's job is or how much stress and strain they're under, it turns out employees are happier with transformational leaders, and they tend to feel empowered. They feel like, look, I think it's my job to go out and make this situation better. And they tend to be more dedicated. They have less turnover. The groups tend to be successful and loyal. People don't even want to leave the team. And the team members tend to be truly interested in making sure that that team succeeds. So, quick summary for project managers. And somebody pointed, as I mentioned, anybody who is a leader but not a boss. So if you do consulting work, this also applies to you. Avoid coercive power and transactional leadership. Instead, use referent, informational, expert, and sometimes reward power. Use transformational leadership and commit to transforming processes, the organization, and the people. Something I've seen in multiple places, and it really is true. If you can achieve charisma, referent power, and transformational leadership, you will get performance beyond expectation. And this will take a while. Practicing these things, you will develop teams that once you set a goal, provide them with the tools and information, then you just got to get out of the way because they're going to run toward the goal. And some of my last thoughts for you, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. This applies to everything in your life. Be strategic and intentional in how you communicate because you're always communicating. And be graceful and kind when you are dealing with conflict and problems because you're always a role model. And use the appropriate type of leadership and power for any given situation because really, all of us are always leading.